My son-in-law mocked my disability until he saw who actually owned his house. I never imagined I would live to see the day when a man I had welcomed into my family with open arms, a man I had once treated like a son, would have the audacity to mock me, to turn my own home into a stage for his cruelty and ignorance, and to treat me as if I were some kind of joke instead of the father of the woman he claimed to love. And that night, the night he crossed every line I had silently drawn, remains etched in my memory as clearly as if it had just happened a moment ago, because it was the moment I realized that some people see kindness and patience as weakness, that some people mistake compassion for a lack of strength, and that the respect we give freely is not always returned. And I had worked my entire life, every single day since I was a boy, building my world from nothing, scrapping together every dollar, every cent, laboring through long days in the heat and cold, aching from dawn until dusk to make sure my family would never know hunger, never know fear, never know the kind of struggle that made me feel powerless in my own skin. And yet here was this man, my daughter's husband, standing across from me at the dinner table, smirking, laughing, making fun of the way I walked, the slight limp I carry from an injury I earned with years of hard work, and the cane I rely on to steady myself that he thought was some sort of punchline. As if the pain I have carried in my body for decades could be the source of someone else's amusement. And worse than his laughter was the silence of my daughter, my own flesh and blood, who sat there frozen, eyes wide, not daring to speak, not daring to intervene. And in that silence, I felt a mix of emotions surge through me that I had never experienced so intensely before. Anger and betrayal and a deep, aching sadness that cut through me sharper than any physical wound ever could. And in that moment, something inside me shifted, a fire igniting quietly but fiercely, a realization that respect is never owed simply because someone shares your blood or your home. That respect is a currency earned. And if it is not given freely, sometimes it must be shown, not with rage or yelling, but with patience, with cunning, with the silent strength that comes from knowing your worth and never letting anyone, no matter how close, diminish it. And as he continued to laugh, oblivious to the storm that had begun to brew within me, I made a promise to myself, a promise that no one, not even my own family if they failed to see the truth, would ever treat me with such disregard without consequence. And that night, as I excused myself quietly from the table, cane tapping softly against the floor, I felt a mixture of pain and resolve intertwine, knowing that the days ahead would require strategy, patience, and a steadfast determination to remind him, in a way he could never ignore, who truly held the power and who truly owned not just the house he lived in, but the respect he had so foolishly thought he could mock without repercussion. And that night, though quiet and ordinary on the surface, marked the beginning of a reckoning that he would never see coming, a reckoning that would teach him lessons no sarcasm or laughter could ever undo. I have always carried myself with a quiet pride, a pride not born from arrogance or showmanship, but from the understanding that every bit of comfort and security I ever provided for my family was earned through sweat, perseverance, and unyielding determination. And growing up in a small town in Ohio, I quickly learned that nothing in life comes free, that every dollar must be worked for, every opportunity fought for, and every inch of progress clawed for with your own two hands. And so I threw myself into construction work as soon as I could, waking before the sun rose, and often returning home long after it had set, my body bruised and aching from the relentless labor, hands calloused from years of handling concrete and timber and steel, back stiff from bending, lifting, and carrying heavy loads that never seemed to stop, enduring scorching summer heat that left my skin burnt and parched, and winters so bitter that the wind cut through every layer of clothing like icy knives. Also that my family could have a home that was safe, warm, and theirs to claim, so that my daughter could grow up without fear of instability and my wife could feel secure. And every moment I spent in pain or exhaustion was worth it because I knew that what I built with my own hands was more than just walls and a roof. It was the promise of stability, of love, and of care. And yet those years of relentless labor took their toll, leaving me with a disability that forced me to walk with a cane, leaving my back stiff and my joints stiff with aches that never fully went away. And some people, perhaps the ignorant or the careless, might see a man like me and assume weakness, laziness, or incompetence. But I knew the truth of it, that every ache and scar was a testament to decades of honest, unglamorous work. And so when the time came to hand my daughter and her husband the keys to the house I had built with my own hands, I did so with nothing but love and trust, believing that they would understand the value of it, the blood, sweat, and tears embedded in every board and brick, believing that they would treat it with respect, and perhaps most importantly believing that they would respect me, the man who had sacrificed endlessly to make their lives comfortable. And I never imagined that the gesture I offered with such a full heart, such genuine faith and family, would be met with mockery, scorn, and attempts to undermine the very thing I had built. And the first time I sensed that my trust was being taken for granted, that my generosity was being treated as weakness, I felt a quiet but powerful shock ripple through me. A realization that love and sacrifice alone are not enough to demand respect, and that some lessons, even the harshest, must be learned the hard way. And as I reflected on those years of tireless work, on the mornings I woke before anyone else and the nights I returned home bone-tired, I understood that the foundation of my life had been strong but fragile in the eyes of those who could not see the struggle behind the surface, and that my challenge now was to protect not just the house I had built but the dignity and authority that came with it, because respect, I realized, is never freely given even to the people you love the most, and the only way to ensure it is to stand firm, to show strength, and to prove, with every measured action, that what you have earned cannot be diminished by ignorance or arrogance, and that my life of hard work and sacrifice, though full of pain and challenges, had prepared me for the moment when I would have to confront the disrespect and entitlement of the man who dared to mock me, because I was a man shaped by struggle, a man who knew the value of what he had built, and a man who understood that trust, once broken, must be met with resolve and unwavering strength. It began quietly at first, almost imperceptibly like the subtle warning tremors before a storm, with small remarks that seemed almost playful on the surface but carried a sharp edge beneath them. And at first I tried to ignore it, thinking perhaps he did not realize the weight of his words or the sting they carried. But over time, those little comments grew bolder, more pointed, more relentless, and it started with his casual jokes about my cane. The way he would glance at me with a smirk and say something meant to sound clever about how I might need help to even make it across the room, or that I should sit down because the old man could not handle the groceries without his support, and I would force a laugh, a hollow, polite laugh that barely masked the tight knot of discomfort twisting in my chest, trying to convince myself it was harmless, trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, trying to chalk it up to ignorance rather than malice. But deep down, I felt each word like a small cut, each joke like a chip in the foundation of my patience. And then it escalated, the barbs became sharper, and he began to make snide remarks when our friends were over, leaning into his cruel sense of humor, loudly recounting my injuries and my limp as if they were amusing anecdotes, stories to be shared for a laugh rather than the real-life consequences of decades of labor and sacrifice. And it cut me deeply, more than I wanted anyone to see. Because it was not just the words themselves but the way he said them with a smug grin, with the arrogance of someone who believed he was clever, who believed he was untouchable. And every time he spoke, I could feel a mixture of anger and sorrow rising inside me. A mixture that was suffocating, that made my chest tighten and my hands shake slightly. And what hurt even more was the silence that accompanied it. The silence of my own daughter, my flesh and blood, who sat there like a statue, frozen, unwilling or perhaps afraid to speak up, to defend the man who had built her world, the man who had given everything so she could have a life without the struggles he had endured. And in those moments, I felt a profound sense of betrayal, a bitter, gnawing betrayal that went beyond hurt feelings and went straight to the core of my heart, because I had spent my life providing for her, protecting her, sacrificing my own comfort and well-being so that she could thrive. And now it felt like she was silently cheering him on, or worse, tolerating his mockery as if my suffering were some inconsequential joke. And I began to question not just her loyalty in those moments, but whether she truly saw me, whether she had ever seen me. The man who had labored day after day, whose hands were calloused, whose back ached, whose sacrifices had been quiet and consistent, who had never asked for recognition or reward, but had only sought to build a life worth having for the people he loved. And as the days went by, every sarcastic comment, every whispered joke, every glance filled with ridicule became heavier, compounded by the realization that the man I had welcomed into my family, the man I had trusted to treat my daughter with love and respect, was undermining me at every opportunity. And with each passing hour, the mix of anger, sorrow, and disbelief swelled inside me until I understood, with a clarity that was both frightening and empowering, that this was no accident, no harmless jest, but a test, a challenge, a blatant disregard for the man who had built everything they were enjoying. And I knew in that deep, quiet place within me that I could not allow this to continue, that something had to change, that I had to find a way to show him, and perhaps even my daughter, that respect is not optional, that it is earned. And that the man who built the house, who built the life, who endured the hardships and carried the burdens, was not someone to be mocked or dismissed. And as I sat quietly in my chair after one particularly cruel dinner, listening to the laughter that was meant to belittle me, I made a promise to myself, a promise that I would not respond with rash anger or shouting, that I would not allow this moment of humiliation to define me, but that I would wait, I would observe, I would plan. And I would find the way to turn the tables so completely that the man who had so arrogantly assumed power would finally understand the depth of his misjudgment. And in that moment of silent determination, I felt a spark ignite, a spark that would grow into a force capable of reclaiming both respect and justice, because the first signs of disrespect, though small and seemingly insignificant at first, had revealed the true challenge that lay ahead. And I knew then that I could not and would not let it go unchecked. The day I truly understood the depths of betrayal was a day that has haunted me and sharpened me at the same time. A day that began like any other but ended with a revelation that shook me to my very core and made me realize that trust, even when freely given from the heart, can be treated as a weapon against you. And it started when I accidentally discovered the papers hidden in a folder in the study, documents that revealed that my son-in-law, the man I had welcomed into my family with open arms, the man I had believed would honor and protect my daughter and my home, had been quietly, meticulously plotting to wrest control of the house from me. The house I had worked for decades to build, every brick and beam a testament to years of relentless labor, sweat, and sacrifice. And the thought that someone I had trusted so completely could scheme behind my back, could consider the possibility of claiming what was mine while I was still alive and capable of defending it, filled me with a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a quiet, simmering rage that made my hands tremble and my chest ache, because I had poured everything I had into that home, into providing a life for my family. And he had the audacity to think he could manipulate the law, twist words, and perhaps even falsify documents to take it from me. And when I confronted him later that evening in the living room, my daughter standing between us, eyes wide with confusion and fear, he looked at me with a smug, cocky grin, laughing as though I were the one out of place, as if my disability, my age, my years of toil made me somehow incapable of defending myself. And in that moment, I could feel the blood surge through my veins, hot and angry, threatening to boil over. Yet I held myself back, forcing every ounce of self-control into keeping my voice calm and steady, because I knew, with the clarity that only comes when you have been wronged so deeply, that anger alone would not serve me, that shouting, threatening, or lashing out would give him exactly what he wanted. The satisfaction of seeing me lose composure, the proof in his mind that I was weak, that I was too old, too tired, too infirm to fight, and instead I focused on observation, on measuring his arrogance, on noting every twitch of his face, every smirk, every careless word that betrayed his overconfidence. And as I watched him struggle to maintain his facade of control, I realized that the real power was mine because I knew the truth. I knew the law, and I knew the extent of the house's ownership and my authority over it. And I understood that the only way to reclaim respect, to reclaim justice, and to show him, finally, that mocking me had been a catastrophic miscalculation, was to plan, to strategize, to quietly but deliberately gather the leverage I needed. And though my heart ached with betrayal and disappointment at the thought that my daughter had stood by, uncertain how to intervene, I also felt a strange clarity, a fierce determination to prove that no one, not even someone as cunning and arrogant as he believed himself to be, could underestimate me or take what was mine without consequence. And so I left that confrontation with a sense of cold purpose, my mind racing with possibilities, my body tense yet controlled, knowing that the days ahead would require patience, intelligence, and precise action, because this betrayal, while painful, had ignited a fire in me. A fire that would not be doused by laughter or arrogance. A fire that would burn steadily until the man who had dared to mock me, to plot against me, and to challenge my authority, finally understood the full weight of the mistake he had made in thinking that he could cross me and get away with it. And I promised myself that I would not allow him to see my full hand until the moment was perfect, until every piece was in place, until the lesson was unavoidable and unforgettable. Because true justice, I had learned over decades of struggle and hard work, is never rushed, it is never emotional, it is calculated, deliberate, and devastating in its inevitability. And I would make sure he understood that fully before the final chapter of this betrayal was written. I began my plan in complete silence, because I knew that a man who mocks others and believes he is untouchable never expects the quiet one to strike back. And I knew that the only way to reclaim what was mine, and expose him for who he truly was, would be to understand the rules better than he did so. I started slowly and carefully learning everything I needed about property laws and home ownership. And I reached out to old friends from my years in construction and businessmen who had seen the world in all its harsh realities and who understood how people try to twist the law for their own gain. And as I listened to their advice and studied every detail, I discovered something that filled me with a calm strength that I had not felt in a long time. And that truth was that I still held legal and rightful ownership of every inch of the house he lived in. And not a single document he tried to manipulate, not a single signature he attempted to forge, held any real power against the law if I approached things correctly. And that realization alone gave me a sense of power that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with strategy, because I knew that he believed he was winning, and that belief was the very weakness I needed to use against him. And so I began gathering every piece of evidence I could find, keeping every text message, every careless word he spoke, every email he sent, and every plan he foolishly discussed out loud, because arrogance always blinds a person to their own mistakes. And recorded conversations where he bragged about what he thought he was getting away with, and each recording felt like a brick in the foundation of a plan that he would never see coming. And I went deeper into his life than he could ever imagine, looking into the debts he had hidden from my daughter, learning which people he owed money to, and understanding just how fragile his financial world truly was. And every night when he went to bed confident in his schemes, I sat in the quiet of my room reviewing documents, planning my next move and piecing together the truth that would eventually crush the lies he had tried to build. And I felt no guilt and no fear, because, for the first time in a long time, I was not the old man he believed me to be. I was the builder I had always been. And this time, I was not building a home, I was building a case, a plan, a moment of reckoning that would show him in the clearest way possible who truly owned everything and who held the real power in that house. And with every sunrise I felt myself growing stronger, because I knew the truth and I knew the law, and I knew that soon he would learn that the man he mocked, the man he underestimated, was the same man who would someday stand before him, calm, steady, and unshaken, while he watched his entire illusion collapse around him. And I waited patiently for that day, knowing it would come, and knowing it would be a day he would never forget. The day I had been quietly preparing for months finally arrived, and I remember it as though it happened yesterday, because every detail is etched into my memory. And it began with me calmly asking him to sit down in the living room, a place where I had spent decades building my life, and where he had once felt he could mock me without consequence. And I could see the smugness on his face, the arrogance in the way he leaned back as if he already owned everything because he had believed so strongly in his schemes and his plans to humiliate me that he could not imagine a single scenario in which he would be confronted and defeated by the man he had laughed at. And yet I remained calm and steady because I knew the power I held. And I began presenting every document, every record, every text, every piece of evidence showing my legal and rightful ownership of the house, and the truth of the property that he had tried so desperately to claim. And I watched as his confidence slowly faded, as the evidence unfolded in front of him piece by piece, because he could see now that every plan he had made, every manipulation he thought would destroy me, was now useless and powerless against the reality that I had always been the owner, the man in control, and the one who held the authority in that home. And I told him directly, and without hesitation, that the house had always been mine, that every inch belonged to me, and that his attempts to take it or humiliate me had failed. And he opened his mouth to argue, but there was nothing to argue. There were no words that could undo the truth, and he realized finally that he had been nothing more than a guest in a home he had believed he could claim, and his arrogance that had blinded him for so long now left him stunned, speechless. And for the first time I saw fear on his face, the fear of realizing that his assumptions were wrong, and that he had underestimated a man he thought was too old, too weak, and too disabled to stand up to him. And as he sat there defeated and silent, my daughter finally looked at me with new eyes, and in her gaze I could see the shock, the understanding, the realization of the man I truly am, the man who built her life, the man who had endured decades of labor and sacrifice, and had quietly prepared for this moment. And in that instant the respect I had longed for, the respect I had silently demanded without shouting or anger, was finally visible and felt, and my heart swelled with a mixture of relief and vindication, because I had proven through patience, through planning, through knowledge and calm determination, that no one could take advantage of me or my home, and I had done it without losing control, without allowing my anger to dictate my actions, but instead with the steady hand of a man who knew his worth and knew exactly how to protect it. And as he left the room defeated, the silence that followed was not empty, it was heavy with the weight of truth and the lessons learned. And for the first time in years, I felt the quiet satisfaction of justice achieved not through vengeance or cruelty, but through wisdom and preparation. And it was a moment that changed everything. The arrogance and mockery that had once filled the room were replaced by a profound understanding of who I am and the strength that can never be taken from a man who knows the value of his life work and dignity. And that day, I finally reclaimed not only control of my home, but the respect that I had quietly waited for all those years. After the day, I confronted him and calmly, methodically, showed him the truth of the house and my ownership. Everything in the atmosphere of our home seemed to shift, as if the air itself had changed. And for the first time I saw a look in my daughter's eyes that I had longed for but never thought I would see, the combination of shock, understanding, and respect that finally allowed her to truly see the man I am. And not just the father she had grown up with, but the man who had quietly endured decades of labor, struggle, and sacrifice to provide for her. And when she finally spoke, her voice trembling with emotion, she apologized for not standing up sooner, admitting that she had been blinded by love and the illusions of marriage, that she had assumed that he, her husband, could never treat me in such a way, that she had failed to see the years of patience, the silent strength, and the intelligence that I had quietly wielded all along. And as she admitted her mistake and her regret, I felt a deep mixture of relief, pride, and tenderness, because she had finally understood the magnitude of my fight, the seriousness of my patience, and the importance of respect as something that is never automatic but must be earned through actions, wisdom, and integrity. And I explained to her in the calmest voice I could muster that shouting, anger, and outward displays of fury can be powerful in the moment but often temporary, whereas observation, strategy, and quiet perseverance carry the weight of inevitability. and that the lessons I had learned over a lifetime of work, struggle, and personal sacrifice had been demonstrated not with loud words, but with deliberate and thoughtful action that ultimately revealed the truth and established authority in a way that could never be ignored. And she listened closely, her eyes wide and tearful, slowly absorbing the reality that the man she had grown up with, the father she had loved and sometimes taken for granted, was a force of patience, intelligence, and steadfastness. And in that moment of understanding, the balance within our family was restored, a sense of peace settling over me like the gentle warmth of the sun after a storm, because I knew that my home was secure, my rules respected, and my dignity intact. And for the first time in years I could breathe fully, free from the weight of disrespect and mockery. And as I watched my daughter reflect on the events that had unfolded, I felt pride in the lessons she had learned, the lessons I had learned long ago through sweat, pain, and quiet determination, that true respect is never given lightly, and that integrity and patience ultimately demand recognition. And in the quiet of that evening, as the sun set over the home I had built with my own hands, I understood that the fight I had undertaken, the betrayal I had endured, and the careful strategy I had executed had not only reclaimed control of the house, but had also restored the trust, understanding, and respect of my daughter. And that was a victory far greater than any material possession, because it reaffirmed the true meaning of family, of dignity, and of the quiet power that comes from standing firm in the truth of who you are and the value of the life you have built. Life has a way of teaching lessons in the harshest, most unexpected ways, and for me, the journey through betrayal, mockery, and the fight to reclaim respect and authority within my own home became the clearest teacher I could have ever imagined, because I came to understand that being kind, being generous, and being patient is not a sign of weakness, but rather a demonstration of the strength that lies within a person who has lived, struggled, and endured. And I saw clearly that those who mock, who belittle, or who disrespect others are often masking their own insecurities or ignorance, projecting the flaws they refuse to face onto those who have worked harder and sacrificed more. And I realized that the most powerful way to respond to such behavior is not with anger, yelling, or immediate confrontation, but with preparation, patience, and a deep understanding of the power and authority you already possess. Because the quiet, deliberate strength that comes from knowing your worth and your rights is often far more effective than any outburst. And I learned that no one, not even a family member or someone close to you, should ever be allowed to diminish your value or make you question the life you have built and the sacrifices you have made. And that true respect, the kind that lasts, does not come automatically from being generous or giving blindly. It comes from consistently demonstrating integrity, wisdom, and the courage to stand firm when the time is right. And sometimes, the lesson must be shown in ways that cannot be ignored, in ways that leave no room for doubt about who holds authority, who commands dignity, and who deserves recognition. And my story, the journey I lived through, serves as both a warning and a guide to anyone who feels powerless in their own home or in their own life. Because even the quietest, most patient person has the ability to reclaim control, to establish boundaries, and to teach lessons that will be remembered. And I hope that anyone who listens to what I endured, the mockery I faced, the betrayal I suffered, and the careful, deliberate steps I took to restore justice, will understand that the quiet power of preparation, strategy, and steadfast patience is not something to underestimate, because it can dismantle arrogance, reveal truth, and command respect in ways that no amount of shouting or anger ever could. And as I reflect on my life now, the house I have protected, the respect I have earned, and the lessons I have imparted to my daughter, I understand that justice is not always swift. It is not always visible in the moment, but it is inevitable when it is guided by truth, preparation, and the unwavering belief in your own worth. And that realization has given me a peace and satisfaction that no betrayal, no mockery, and no challenge could ever take away. Because in the end, the most important victories are the ones that restore dignity, affirm integrity, and remind us that standing firm, even quietly, is the ultimate way to honor the life we have built and the values we hold dear. The house stands today as more than just walls and a roof. It stands as a monument to the struggles, sacrifices, and unwavering resolve that have defined my life, and as a constant reminder that respect, dignity, and the authority we hold in our own homes are not gifts to be taken for granted but treasures that must be earned, protected, and defended with patience, intelligence, and courage. And as I walk through the rooms that I built with my own hands, every floorboard, every beam, every corner telling the story of decades of labor, I see the truth that the battles we fight in life are not always loud, not always visible, and not always acknowledged immediately, but their impact resonates deeply and shapes the people we are and the families we raise. And I think about my son-in-law, the man who once believed he could mock me, undermine me, and challenge my authority, and I see how he has changed, humbled by the realization that arrogance and deceit can never overpower patience, preparation, and truth. And I think about my daughter who finally saw the full measure of the man I am, the sacrifices I made, and the quiet strength that has carried me through decades of struggle. And in her eyes I saw understanding, respect, and love restored, the kind that grows from witnessing someone endure and overcome rather than from empty words or fleeting gestures. And I have learned, even at 55, that age and disability do not diminish the ability to stand firm, to fight for what is rightfully yours, and to win the battles that matter most, because true strength is not measured by physical power but by resilience, wisdom, and the unwavering belief in one's worth. And even as my back aches and my cane is a constant companion, I feel my spirit stronger than ever, knowing that no insult, no mockery, no challenge can break a man who knows himself and the value of his life's work unless he allows it to. And I hope that anyone listening to my story understands that the greatest revenge is never in causing harm to those who wrong you, in returning insult with insult, or in striking back with anger, but in proving your worth, demonstrating your strength, and protecting your dignity through deliberate action, through patience, and through resilience. And I hope they understand that the life we build, the values we uphold, and the respect we earn are far more powerful than any fleeting moment of humiliation, because they endure long after the insults fade. And that in the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I stood firm, that I reclaimed my home, my authority, and my dignity, I feel a peace that no betrayal could ever take away, and a confidence that the legacy of respect and integrity I leave behind is unshakable. A legacy that is written not in anger, but in the quiet triumph of a man who knows who he is, what he has earned, and how to protect it no matter the cost or the obstacle. And as I sit in the living room watching the sun cast golden light through the windows I built, I am reminded that the heart of a home is not the furniture or the walls or even the roof. It is the strength, patience, and unwavering spirit of the person who defends it. And that is a lesson I carry with me always, and one I hope others will understand and honor in their own lives.